The storm reached Earth 9 before sunset, swallowing the horizon beneath a wall of violet clouds and turning the empty plains into a shimmering ocean of rain. Ethan Mercer had seen electrical storms on mining moons, dust storms on Mars, and once, during a badly planned holiday, a sandstorm that removed the paint from his rental rover. None of them had prepared him for rain that glowed. Each drop struck the black soil with a faint blue spark. The crystal trees surrounding him answered with low musical vibrations, as though the entire forest had begun humming to itself. Above the canopy, forks of white lightning stretched across the sky and split into geometric patterns no natural storm should have produced. Ethan pulled the hood of his travel coat lower over his face and checked the damaged navigation unit attached to his wrist. The display flashed the same message for the 7th time. Position unknown. Very helpful, he muttered. Next, tell me I'm wet. The device emitted a polite warning tone. Environmental moisture extreme. Ethan stared at it. I walked into that one. His shuttle had gone down 2 hours earlier after a gravity surge twisted its guidance field and threw it into the upper atmosphere. The emergency landing had been violent enough to rearrange the contents of every storage compartment and introduce Ethan's forehead to the control panel. The ship was repairable, probably. Unfortunately, the communication array was not, and the nearest registered settlement was somewhere beyond the northern ridge, assuming the map had not been corrupted along with everything else. He continued through the forest, boots sinking into luminous mud. Every few minutes, the crystal branches overhead pulsed with stored electricity. Thin strands of energy moved through them like veins beneath glass. Then Ethan heard something beneath the rain. He stopped. At first he thought it was one of the forest creatures listed in the Planetary Survival Guide, most of which had names like razor-mouthed crawler and do not approach under any circumstances. The guide's author had clearly lacked imagination but possessed excellent survival instincts. The sound came again. A sob, small, frightened, human or close enough. Ethan turned toward a cluster of fallen crystal trunks and pushed through the silver ferns. Beneath the roots of an enormous tree, sheltered only slightly from the storm, sat a child. She looked no older than 6. Her silver hair clung to her face, and her white clothing, decorated with fine golden patterns, was soaked with rain and darkened by mud. At first glance, she could have been human. Then she lifted her head, and Ethan saw the long, elegant ears rising through her wet hair. Her eyes were turquoise and faintly luminous. She immediately scrambled backward. It's all right, Ethan said, raising both hands. I'm not dangerous. A bolt of lightning struck somewhere close enough to shake the ground. Ethan glanced toward the sky. Compared with the weather, I'm practically charming. The girl did not understand him. Her gaze moved from his face to the tool belt at his waist, then to the compact plasma cutter hanging beside it. Ethan slowly removed the cutter and placed it on the ground. No weapons. The girl pointed at the device. Technically, it's for repairing engines, he added. It only becomes a weapon when somebody ignores the manual. She stared at him without blinking. Ethan sighed. Right, different language. He pointed to himself. Ethan. The child remained silent for a moment, then she touched her chest. Lyria. Her voice was soft but clear. Lyria, Ethan repeated. She nodded. A second tremor rolled through the ground. This time the child flinched and covered her ears. Ethan's expression changed. Whatever questions he had, who she was, where she had come from, why a child in ceremonial clothing was alone on an abandoned planet, could wait. He removed the thermal cloak from his backpack and held it out. Lyria eyed it suspiciously. It's warm, he said. She continued staring. It doesn't bite. Still nothing. Ethan wrapped one corner around his own shoulder, pretending to enjoy it. See, completely harmless. Unlike the soup in my emergency kit. Lyria watched him for several seconds, then reached forward and touched the fabric. Heat spread through it instantly. Her eyes widened. She allowed him to place it around her shoulders. The cloak nearly swallowed her whole. Ethan smiled. A little large, but fashion is suffering. Lyria looked up at him, clearly confused. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it transformed her face. For a moment, the storm seemed farther away. Ethan activated the emergency shelter from his pack. A compressed metal cylinder unfolded across the ground, expanding into a narrow dome covered in translucent thermal material. Lyria jumped backward as it inflated. "It's a tent," Ethan explained. "An unnecessarily dramatic tent." She cautiously approached it and tapped the wall. The shelter responded with a cheerful chime. Lyria jumped again. Ethan looked at the ceiling. "Who programmed that sound?" Inside, the heater cast a warm orange glow. Ethan gave Lyria a cup of nutrient broth, which she sniffed with deep suspicion. "I agree," he said. "It smells like someone described vegetables to a machine." She took a careful sip, then another. Within seconds, the cup was empty. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Apparently, I've misjudged the chef." Outside, the glowing rain hammered against the shelter. Lyria sat close to the heater, wrapped in his cloak, while Ethan watched the dark forest through the transparent wall. Far above the storm, hidden beyond the clouds, hundreds of royal warships were entering the system. And none of them yet knew that the missing princess was sharing synthetic soup with a stranded human who still believed his worst problem was a broken shuttle. Lyria slept with the thermal cloak pulled to her chin, curled beside the emergency heater as if she had spent her entire life trusting strange humans in damaged tents. Ethan, meanwhile, remained awake. The storm refused to weaken. Rain struck the shelter in hard, glittering waves, and every few minutes blue lightning crawled across the crystal forest. The trees absorbed the energy and released it as low notes that trembled through the ground. Ethan checked the shelter's power level, 38%. "Excellent," he whispered. "Only the heater, life support, and my optimism are failing." Lyria stirred but did not wake. He lowered the brightness of the interior lights and studied her clothing more closely. The golden patterns embroidered across the white fabric were not decorative. Tiny circuits moved within the thread, rearranging themselves in response to her breathing. Near her collar rested a small oval device made from a metal Ethan did not recognize. He leaned closer. The device flashed. A sharp beam scanned his face. Ethan froze. "Well, that seems rude." A holographic symbol appeared above it, a crown surrounded by 7 stars. The meaning was obvious even without translation. Lyria was not an ordinary lost child. Ethan sat back slowly. "Of course," he murmured. "I couldn't rescue a farmer's daughter. It had to be someone with a crown." The oval device suddenly emitted a burst of static. A fragmented voice pushed through the interference, speaking in a rapid alien language. Ethan caught only tone, urgent, disciplined, frightened. Then the transmission vanished. Lyria woke instantly. Her eyes opened wide and she grabbed the device with both hands. "Lyria?" Ethan asked. She pressed it repeatedly, but the metal remained dark. Her expression tightened. She looked toward the ceiling, then spoke quickly, pointing above the storm. Ethan understood only one word: "Mother." He nodded. "Your mother is looking for you." Lyria's eyes filled with relief and fear at the same time. Ethan touched his wrist console and opened the local topographic map. Most of it was corrupted, but a mountain ridge appeared several kilometers east. If they climbed high enough, the child's beacon might break through the magnetic interference. He pointed at the ridge, then at her device, then upward. Lyria understood immediately. She stood, still wrapped in the cloak. Ethan looked at the storm outside. "Right now." She nodded firmly. He glanced at the power level again. 31%. The shelter would not last until morning anyway. "Fine," he said. "Nothing improves a terrible night like hiking through electrically charged rain." He collapsed the shelter and secured it to his pack. Before leaving, he handed Lyria a pair of oversized protective goggles. They covered half her face. She stared at him. "You look very professional." Lyria adjusted them and smiled proudly. The forest had become more dangerous during the night. Pools of luminous water formed between the roots, and floating organisms drifted through the rain like transparent jellyfish. Ethan's scanner identified them as harmless. One immediately attached itself to his backpack. Ethan twisted around. Harmless is becoming a flexible term. Lyria giggled and gently tapped the creature. It released the pack and floated away. Apparently it respects royalty, Ethan said. She gave him a puzzled look. Never mind. Long political discussion. They moved carefully through the trees. Lyria's small hands occasionally touched the glowing trunks, causing golden ripples to spread through the crystal. Ethan began to suspect the forest recognized her species. Halfway to the ridge, his scanner detected movement. 3 large shapes circled ahead. The first creature stepped into view on 6 jointed legs. Its body was covered in mirror-like armor, and a narrow head opened into several rows of luminous teeth. Ethan slowly reached for his plasma cutter. Lyria grabbed his sleeve. The creature lowered itself and released a deep metallic growl. 2 more appeared behind it. "Wonderful," Ethan whispered. "The local welcoming committee." He activated the cutter. A blue arc formed along its edge. Lyria stepped in front of him. "Lyria, no." She raised one hand and spoke a single sharp word. The creatures stopped. Their glowing eyes dimmed. One by one they lowered their armored heads. Ethan stared. Lyria walked forward and placed her palm against the first creature's face. It produced a soft clicking sound, almost affectionate. She turned back to Ethan with a pleased smile. He slowly switched off the cutter. "I had that completely under control." Lyria raised one eyebrow. Ethan sighed. "You really are a princess." The creatures escorted them until the ground began to rise. Near the top of the ridge, the storm clouds thinned enough to reveal brief flashes of the upper atmosphere. Lyria removed the oval device from her collar and held it high. At first, nothing happened. Then a golden beam shot into the sky. The clouds opened around it. Ethan's wrist console screamed with incoming signals. Hundreds, then thousands. The entire orbital spectrum filled with encrypted transmissions. A shadow moved above the storm, too large to be a cloud. Then another appeared, and another. The first warship descended through the violet sky, its black hull stretching for kilometers. Golden lights burned along its sides, and immense weapon arrays rotated toward the planet. Behind it came dozens more, then hundreds, arranged in perfect formation. Ethan stared upward as the royal fleet covered the stars. Lyria clapped her hands excitedly. He looked down at her. "Your mother owns all of those." Lyria nodded. Ethan swallowed. "I suddenly regret complaining about the soup." The first vessel did not land. It hovered above the ridge like a second night sky, its immense hull blotting out the storm clouds while golden engines burned beneath it in silent rings. The rain changed direction under the force of its gravity field, rising from the ground in silver streams before drifting sideways through the air. Ethan shielded his face and stared upward. A section of the warship opened, not a door. An entire portion of the hull unfolded into a radiant platform wider than a city street. 6 smaller craft descended from it in perfect formation. Their surfaces were smooth and dark, marked by the same 7-star crown Ethan had seen on Lyria's collar. They moved without visible engines, gliding through the storm as though gravity had politely stepped aside. Lyria waved both arms. The lead craft answered with a pulse of blue light. Ethan glanced at her. "Good, they saw us. Let's hope your people use thank you before disintegrate." The girl smiled as if he had made a joke, although she understood almost none of it. The ships settled around the ridge. Their ramps opened simultaneously. Armored soldiers emerged in rows, tall and human in shape, with long ears rising through silver helmets. Their armor was pearl-white and edged with gold, but there was nothing ceremonial about the rifles they carried. Each weapon contained a rotating core of compressed light powerful enough, according to Ethan's scanner, to turn the ridge into a fond memory. Every rifle pointed at him. Ethan slowly raised his hands. "I rescued the child," he said. This is usually the part where everyone applauds. The soldiers spread out. One of them issued a command. Ethan did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. "Do not move." "I wasn't planning to," he replied. "My legs have resigned." Lyria stepped in front of him. The nearest soldier immediately lowered his weapon. Then all of them did. The child spoke rapidly, pointing at Ethan, the thermal cloak, the storm, and finally the empty soup cup still attached to his pack. Her explanation became more animated with every sentence. At one point she imitated Ethan being frightened by the floating forest creature. Several soldiers looked at him. Ethan frowned. That detail was not important. One of the guards appeared to suppress a smile. A low vibration passed through the air. The soldiers turned toward the largest shuttle and dropped to one knee. Ethan looked at Lyria. Her excitement vanished. She stood very still. A woman stepped onto the ramp. Queen Elyndra wore no helmet. Rain touched her long black hair but did not soak it. A transparent field surrounded her, turning each drop into drifting sparks. She looked human in nearly every way, with pale skin, sharp features, and luminous green eyes, but her long ears rose elegantly through her hair. A dark cloak flowed from her shoulders, threaded with moving constellations. She did not look at Ethan. She looked only at Lyria. For several seconds neither moved. Then the queen crossed the distance between them with no concern for dignity, protocol, or the dozens of soldiers watching. Lyria ran. Elyndra dropped to her knees and caught her daughter so tightly that the thermal cloak twisted between them. Her controlled expression broke. She pressed her face into Lyria's wet hair and closed her eyes. The storm continued around them. The warships remained silent. Even the soldiers lowered their heads. Ethan looked away, suddenly feeling like an intruder in something too private to witness. Then Lyria began speaking into her mother's shoulder. Elyndra listened. Her gaze slowly lifted toward Ethan. There was nothing soft in it. She stood while keeping one hand on her daughter. A translation field activated around her throat. "You found her." The words reached Ethan in clear, accented English. "Yes." "You removed her from the royal transport." "No." "You disabled her location beacon." "No." "You crossed a restricted world, carrying the heir to the throne." "That one is technically true, but the wording makes it sound worse." Several rifles rose again. Ethan immediately lifted his hands higher. "The transport crashed before I saw her. The beacon failed because of the storm. I gave her shelter, food, and a cloak. The cloak was mine. I mention that only because everyone seems very interested in evidence." The queen studied him. Lyria tugged at her mother's sleeve and spoke again. Her small hands reenacted the moment Ethan placed the cloak around her. Then she pointed toward the dark forest and mimicked the armored creatures bowing. Elyndra's expression changed, though only slightly. "You entered the crystal forest at night. I entered it by accident. You crossed the feeding territory of the Varen. I was told they were harmless." The queen looked toward Ethan's wrist scanner. "That model lists them as harmless only during mating season." Ethan glanced at the device. It left out the second half. For the first time, one corner of Elyndra's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it had potential. She stepped closer. "You protected my daughter without knowing who she was. I knew she was lost. You had no obligation." "She was 6. Elyndra's eyes held his. Among her people, queens were taught to suspect kindness. Every gift had a motive. Every rescue created a debt. Every stranger near the royal family was a possible assassin. But Ethan looked exhausted, soaked, bruised, and mainly concerned that one of the soldiers might confiscate his backpack. Lyria took his hand. The entire guard formation stiffened. Ethan looked down at her. She gave him a trusting smile. Queen Elyndra saw it. The suspicion in her face did not disappear, but something older and more powerful moved beneath it. Gratitude. She turned to the soldiers. "Lower all weapons." Every rifle dropped. Elyndra faced Ethan once more. "You will come aboard my flagship." Ethan looked at the enormous vessel above them. "Is that an invitation?" "It is a royal command." "Of course it is." Lyria squeezed his hand and began pulling him toward the shuttle. Ethan followed, glancing at the armed escort closing around him. "I've had friendlier thank you notes," he muttered. The translation field caught every word. Behind him, Queen Elyndra finally smiled. The shuttle rose through the storm without shaking once. Ethan only realized they had left the ground when the crystal forest dropped beneath the transparent floor and became a web of blue light far below. He immediately stepped away from the glass. Lyria noticed. She pointed downward and smiled. "I trust floors," Ethan said. "I simply prefer them when they hide the distance to my death." The translation field repeated his words in the royal language. Two guards exchanged glances. One of them looked suspiciously amused. Queen Elyndra stood near the forward window with one hand resting on Lyria's shoulder. Up close, her armor appeared to be alive. Black metallic plates shifted with each breath, and thin golden lines moved across them like liquid circuits. Her long ears were decorated with delicate rings of floating light that rotated without touching her skin. Ethan tried not to stare. The queen noticed anyway. "Is something wrong? Your jewelry is defying several laws of physics. It is ceremonial. That does not make it less illegal." Lyria laughed and pulled Ethan toward a curved seat. The moment he sat, the surface adjusted around his body and scanned him with a green beam. "Unknown biological structure detected," the seat announced. Ethan looked offended. "I'm sitting right here." The shuttle entered the flagship through an opening large enough to swallow an orbital station. Beyond it stretched an immense hangar filled with fighters, transport craft, repair drones, and columns of armored soldiers. Above them, artificial clouds drifted beneath the ceiling, creating a pale sunrise inside the ship. Ethan stared through the window. "You built weather indoors." Elyndra glanced at him. "The crew serves for months without seeing a planet." "My shuttle barely has a functioning shower." The ramp opened, and an honor guard formed instantly. Hundreds of soldiers struck their fists against their chests. Their unified movement echoed through the hangar like thunder. Ethan paused at the top of the ramp. "They aren't doing that for me, are they?" "No," Elyndra said. "Good, I haven't prepared a speech." Lyria took one of her mother's hands and one of Ethan's. Together they crossed the hangar while officers bowed deeply. Ethan felt every pair of eyes follow him. Some appeared curious. Others appeared openly hostile. One officer stepped forward in silver armor marked with crimson lines. He was older than the others, with long white ears and a narrow scar across his jaw. "Your Majesty," he said through the translation field, "the human must be isolated until security confirms his identity." Lyria tightened her grip on Ethan's hand. Elyndra's expression cooled. "Commander Vaelor, he saved the princess. He also appeared on a restricted world during an assassination attempt." Ethan turned toward the queen. "Assassination attempt." The hangar became very quiet. Elyndra looked at Vaelor. "You were instructed not to discuss that here." "And he was not instructed to hear it," Ethan added. "Yet somehow I feel included." Vaelor ignored him. The royal transport did not crash because of the storm. Its navigation core was sabotaged. Princess Lyria's escape capsule was launched manually. Ethan looked down at the child. Her smile had vanished. Fragments of the previous night returned to him. Her ceremonial clothing, the broken beacon, the fear in her eyes whenever the sky flashed. She had not simply become lost. Someone had tried to make sure she disappeared. Elyndra's voice lowered. "My daughter's attendants were found unconscious aboard the transport. The security records were erased. We do not yet know who launched the capsule, or why it landed on Earth 9, Ethan said. Vaelor studied him. "A convenient observation." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Would an inconvenient one help?" The commander stepped closer. "You expect us to believe you arrived by accident." My shuttle's engine exploded. A skilled saboteur could arrange that. A skilled saboteur would arrange a better place to land. One of the nearby guards coughed to hide a laugh. Vaelor's eyes narrowed. Elyndra lifted one hand. "That is enough." She turned to Ethan. Commander Vaelor is responsible for royal security. Suspicion is his profession. He seems very dedicated. He once arrested a statue. Vaelor's jaw tightened. The statue contained surveillance equipment. It was still a statue, Elyndra replied. Lyria giggled. For the first time since entering the ship, the tension eased. Elyndra led Ethan from the hangar into a corridor whose walls displayed moving images of distant galaxies. Tiny maintenance drones floated overhead, repairing the surface with streams of silver particles. One approached Ethan, scanned the mud on his coat, and released a disapproving tone. "I'm being judged by a cleaning machine." "It believes you are contaminating the corridor," Elyndra said. "It has excellent instincts." They reached a circular medical chamber. A physician waited beside a platform surrounded by rings of pale light. She was human in appearance except for her long ears and golden eyes. "You will be examined," Elyndra said. "Is that also a royal command?" "Yes, I'm beginning to understand monarchy." Ethan lay on the platform. The rings moved over him, projecting images of his bones and organs into the air. Lyria watched with fascination. The physician frowned. "The human has 2 fractured ribs, electrical burns, dehydration, and severe muscular fatigue." Elyndra looked at him sharply. "You were injured before you found Lyria. During the landing. And you still carried her through the forest. She has short legs." Lyria placed both hands on her hips. Ethan looked at her. That sounded less insulting before translation. The physician activated a field of blue particles. Pain vanished from Ethan's ribs as microscopic machines entered his bloodstream and began repairing the damaged tissue. Ethan watched the floating medical display. That usually costs 6 months' salary on a human colony. "You will not be charged," Elyndra said. "Finally, royal hospitality improves." The doors opened. An officer rushed inside and bowed. "Your Majesty, we recovered data from the princess's damaged beacon." Elyndra straightened, and the device received a transmission moment before the capsule launched. A holographic symbol appeared above the officer's wrist, the 7-star crown, but one of the stars was black. Elyndra's face lost all warmth. Ethan saw recognition in her eyes. "Whose insignia is that?" he asked. The queen remained silent for several seconds. Then she looked toward Lyria. "It belongs to my sister." Queen Elyndra dismissed the officers, but the symbol remained suspended above the medical platform. 7 golden stars surrounding a crown, with one star darkened as though burned from the inside. Ethan sat up slowly while the medical rings completed their work. The pain in his ribs had faded, replaced by a strange warmth moving beneath his skin. "So," he said, "your sister sent the transmission." Elyndra stood motionless beside the hologram. "My sister Veressa died 12 years ago." Ethan looked at the black star again. "That makes her involvement slightly more complicated." Commander Vaelor entered the chamber with 4 guards and sealed the doors behind him. His usual suspicion had been replaced by something heavier. "The insignia belonged to Princess Veressa's private intelligence network," he said. "It was erased after her death." "Apparently not very thoroughly," Ethan replied. Vaelor ignored him with the dignity of a man who considered humor a contagious disease. Elyndra moved toward a circular console. At her touch, the room darkened, and the beacon's recovered memory expanded around them. Fragments of data drifted through the air, corrupted coordinates, security codes, and brief images from Lyria's transport. The first image showed Lyria sitting beside 2 attendants. The second showed the cabin lights failing. The third revealed a cloaked figure entering the cockpit. The face was hidden, but the figure's hand carried a ring marked by the black star. Lyria pressed closer to Ethan. He lowered his voice. "Do you remember this?" She stared at the image, then shook her head. The recording continued. The figure leaned over the navigation core and inserted a narrow crystal key. Alarms flashed. The attendants collapsed when silver gas poured through the vents. Then the figure lifted Lyria, carried her toward the escape capsule, and placed something in her hand. A final sound emerged through the damaged recording. A woman's voice. "Find the human." The image vanished. Everyone turned toward Ethan. He raised both hands. "I would like to officially object to the direction of this conversation." Vaelor stepped closer. "You expect us to believe that message has nothing to do with you. I didn't even know this planet existed yesterday. The message specifically ordered the princess to find a human. There are several billion of us. That is not a very precise kidnapping plan." Elyndra enlarged the last fragment. A sequence of numbers appeared behind the voice. Ethan recognized them immediately. "That is my shuttle identification code." Vaelor drew his weapon. The guards followed. Lyria stepped between Ethan and the rifles. "Enough," Elyndra said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber lights dimmed under the force of it. Every weapon lowered. Ethan stared at the numbers. "My shuttle was redirected by a gravity surge. I thought it was an accident." "It was not," Elyndra said. Vaelor's jaw tightened. "Someone brought both of them to Earth 9. "But why?" Ethan asked. The Queen looked toward the Black Star. "Because something is hidden there." The flagship's alarms erupted. Red light flooded the chamber. A mechanical voice announced an unauthorized energy pulse from the planet below. Across the holographic walls, the image of Earth 9 appeared. A golden signal was rising from the crystal forest, spreading through the atmosphere in concentric waves. The fleet reacted instantly. Warships changed formation. Fighters launched from the hangars. Defensive shields formed around the flagship. Ethan slid off the medical platform. "That signal began after we left the ridge." Vaelor checked his wrist display. "It matches the frequency of the princess's beacon." Lyria reached inside the thermal cloak. She removed the small oval device. It was glowing. A line of golden light extended from it toward the floor. Elyndra knelt before her daughter. "What did the cloaked woman give you?" Lyria thought for a moment, then reached into a hidden pocket beneath her collar. She pulled out a crystal no larger than a coin. The instant it touched the air, the chamber disappeared. A vast holographic map unfolded around them, showing tunnels buried beneath Earth 9. At the center rested a structure shaped like an enormous sleeping machine. Ancient symbols moved across its surface. Ethan's translator failed to identify most of them, but one repeated several times. "Gate." Commander Vaelor stared at the map. "That technology predates our civilization." Elyndra's expression hardened. Varessa discovered it before she died. A new image appeared. This time the woman was not hidden. She looked almost exactly like Elyndra, with long ears, dark hair, and the same luminous green eyes. She was older in the recording, exhausted and wounded, but unmistakably alive. "Elyndra," the recording said, "if you are seeing this, then the Council has finally moved against Lyria. Do not trust the royal court. Do not trust the fleet's command network. The gate beneath Earth 9 can identify the one person capable of stopping them." Her holographic gaze shifted toward Ethan. "The human traveler must open it." The message ended. Silence filled the chamber. Ethan looked from the ancient machine to the Queen, then to the armed commander. "I miss the forest creatures," he said. "They were much less complicated." A violent impact struck the flagship. The chamber tilted. Beyond the walls, one of the royal warships opened fire on another. Then a second vessel turned its weapons toward the Queen's flagship. Vaelor checked the tactical display. "The fleet command network has been compromised." Elyndra lifted Lyria into her arms and turned toward Ethan. "We return to the planet. Through a civil war." "Yes." "To open an ancient alien gate." "Yes." "Using a key left by your dead sister, who is apparently not dead." Elyndra met his eyes. "Yes." Ethan picked up his damaged coat. "I should have stayed on vacation." The doors opened as explosions rolled through the ship. Lyria reached toward him. Ethan took her hand. Together, they followed the Queen toward the launch bay, while the royal fleet began tearing itself apart above Earth 9. The shuttle plunged through the battle with its shields burning white. Outside, royal warships exchanged streams of golden plasma across the upper atmosphere. One cruiser split apart above them, its broken sections drifting through the storm like falling cities. Commander Vaelor stood at the controls, steering between debris while warning symbols multiplied across the glass. "Our rear shield is failing," he said. Ethan tightened his harness. "Is there a front shield?" "Yes." "Then fly backward." Vaelor gave him a look of deep personal disappointment. Queen Elyndra almost smiled, but Lyria was watching the burning sky, so she pulled her daughter closer and turned her away from the window. The shuttle struck the atmosphere hard. Violet lightning crawled over its hull as they descended toward the crystal forest. Beneath the trees, the ancient signal had opened a vast circular passage in the ground. Golden machinery rotated below the surface, revealing a stairway that descended into blue darkness. They landed beside the opening. Vaelor and his guards formed a defensive line while Elyndra carried Lyria toward the stairs. Ethan followed, the crystal key warm inside his hand. The passage led deeper than his scanner could measure. The walls were not stone but dormant machines, their black surfaces awakening as Lyria passed. Symbols appeared beneath her feet, then flowed toward Ethan as though the entire structure had been waiting for both of them. At the bottom stood the gate. It was larger than a palace, a ring of ancient metal surrounding empty space. At its center floated a human-shaped outline made of stars. Ethan approached the console. A narrow opening formed. "Of course," he said, "ancient civilizations never use buttons." He inserted the crystal. The gate awakened. Light swept through the chamber, scanning Ethan, Elyndra, and Lyria. Then the image of Varessa appeared above the console, not a recording this time, but a living transmission. Elyndra stopped breathing. Her sister looked older, her dark hair streaked with silver, but she was alive. "Varessa." "I am sorry," Varessa said. "I could not return. The council watched every path to the throne." She explained that 12 years earlier, members of the Royal Council had discovered the gate beneath Earth 9. It was a relic created by an extinct civilization capable of linking minds across interstellar distances. They planned to use it to control fleets, erase disobedience, and turn queens into ceremonial prisoners. Varessa had sabotaged the project and vanished into exile. When the council learned that Lyria possessed the rare neural pattern required to activate the gate, they arranged the transport attack. Varessa's agents intervened, guiding both Lyria's capsule and Ethan's shuttle to the same world. Ethan frowned. "Why me?" The star-shaped figure moved closer. The gate opened his memories, years spent traveling alone, avoiding permanent homes, leaving before friendships became obligations. Yet beneath all that distance lay one instinct he had never managed to silence. He stopped when someone needed help. Varessa's voice softened. "The gate rejects ambition. It required someone with no desire for a throne, command, or reward." Ethan glanced at Elyndra. "You chose the least qualified person in the galaxy." "No," the Queen said, "the least corruptible." Above them, an explosion shook the chamber. Vaelor's voice came through the communicator. "Council forces have landed. We cannot hold them for long." The console opened beneath Ethan's hands. He saw the compromised fleet network spread before him like a web of poisoned light. The gate offered him control over every vessel. For one terrifying moment, he understood why the council wanted it. With a thought, he could command armies. With another, he could silence worlds. Lyria slipped her hand into his. The temptation vanished. Ethan did not seize the fleet. He freed it. The gate sent a wave through orbit, breaking the council's control and restoring every crew member's mind. Across the sky, weapons powered down. Ships once turned against one another changed formation and surrounded the traitorous command vessels. Inside the chamber, the ancient system projected the Council's secret records across every ship in the fleet. Assassination orders, stolen research, erased names, and proof of the attack on Lyria. The war ended in silence. Vaelor entered moments later, armor scorched and one ear bleeding. The Council commanders have surrendered. Ethan removed his hands from the console. "Good. I was running out of heroic ideas. The gate began to close. Varessa's image flickered. Elyndra stepped forward. "Come home." "I will," Varessa promised, "when the last of their agents is found." Lyria touched the hologram. Varessa smiled and placed her hand against the same point from the other side of the stars. Then she disappeared. Weeks later, Urith 9 was no longer marked abandoned. The Crystal Forest became protected territory, and the gate was sealed under joint royal and human authority. Commander Vaelor personally supervised security, although Ethan claimed this was only because no statues were available to arrest. Elyndra offered Ethan wealth, land, and a formal position at court. He refused the wealth. He declined the land. The position took longer. For most of his life, Ethan had believed freedom meant never staying anywhere long enough to be needed. But Lyria had changed that. She had trusted him in the reign before either of them knew the other's name, and he had discovered that responsibility was not always a chain. Sometimes it was a hand reaching for yours in the dark. He accepted the role of royal envoy. His first official duty was attending a ceremony in the capital, where thousands gathered beneath floating gardens and artificial stars. Lyria stood beside him wearing a new white cloak sized correctly this time. Elyndra approached in full royal armor. "You understand that an envoy must behave with dignity." Ethan looked at Vaelor, who was glaring at a decorative statue. "I am surrounded by excellent examples." Lyria laughed. The queen tried to remain serious, failed, and smiled. Far above them, the fleet that had once descended in anger now formed the seven-star crown across the sky. Ethan looked up at the warships, then down at the child holding his hand. He had arrived on Urith 9 as a stranded traveler searching for a way to leave. Now, for the first time in years, he had found a reason to stay.